Alaska, where winter darkness swallows towns whole and help is hundreds of miles away. I'm Bleak Fears, and tonight I'm sharing 9 true horror stories from Alaska's most isolated communities. For privacy, names and minor details have been changed, but these events are 100% real. They happen to real people in real places. Before we begin, drop your location and current time in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. And if these stories keep you up tonight, hit that subscribe button so we can lose sleep together. Let's begin. My name is Reese, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the summer of 2016 at a salmon cannery in Dillingham, Alaska. I was 28 years old at the time, and it was my 3rd season working the processing line during the Bristol Bay fishing season. I know this is going to sound absolutely insane, but I swear on everything I love that what I'm about to tell you is true. To this day, I look at my hands and feel sick. Dillingham sits on the Nushagak River in southwest Alaska, and during fishing season, the town transforms from a quiet community of about 2,500 people into a chaotic hub of thousands of seasonal workers. The canneries run 24/7, processing millions of pounds of sockeye salmon. The work is brutal, the hours are long, and the pay is decent if you can handle standing in the same spot for 12 to 16 hours a day, gutting fish until your hands cramp and your back screams. I'd done it before. I thought I knew what to expect. I was assigned to the night shift that year, which meant I worked from 8 p.m. until sometimes 8 or 9 the next morning, depending on how many fish the boats brought in. The processing line was loud, cold, and smelled like a combination of fish, guts, bleach, and the ocean. We wore rubber aprons, thick gloves, and rubber boots that were always soaked through by the end of the shift. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in this harsh, clinical glow that made everyone look half dead. Maybe we were. About 3 weeks into the season, a new guy showed up on our line. His name was Esteban, and he kept to himself in a way that felt different from the usual antisocial behavior you see in cannery workers. Most people who don't talk much are just exhausted or don't speak great English. Esteban was different. He watched people. Not in an obvious way, but I'd catch him staring at someone's hands while they worked, or looking at the back of someone's neck with this intensity that made my skin crawl. He was good at the job, though. Too good, actually. He worked with this efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. His knife never hesitated. Every cut was precise, fluid, faster than anyone I'd ever seen. Our supervisor loved him, of course. Esteban could process twice as many fish as the rest of us in half the time. But there was something wrong about watching him work. The movements didn't look quite human. His hands bent at angles that seemed impossible. And I swear I saw his fingers. I don't know how to describe it. They looked like they had too many joints. I tried to tell myself I was seeing things. We all got tired working those hours. Hallucinations weren't uncommon when you were running on 4 hours of sleep and existed on a diet of energy drinks and whatever food the cannery served in the break room. But other people noticed too. This woman named Sienna, who worked 2 stations down from me, mentioned it one night during our 15-minute break. That new guy's hands are fucked up, she said, lighting a cigarette outside the processing building. The July sun was still high in the sky, even though it was almost midnight. That's Alaska in the summer. The midnight sun messes with your head almost as much as the polar darkness does in winter. Yeah, I've noticed, I said, relieved I wasn't the only one. Something's not right about him. You see how his fingers bend? Like backwards almost? Sienna took a long drag and shook her head. I don't like being near him. He smells wrong too. She was right. Esteban had this smell that cut through even the overpowering fish stench. It was chemical, almost medicinal, but with an undertone of something rotting. Not fish rot, something else. Something that made my stomach turn every time I caught a whiff of it. Things got worse about a week later. It was around 3 in the morning, and we just finished processing a massive delivery. The line had broken down, some mechanical issue with one of the conveyor belts, and the supervisor told us to take 30 while the maintenance guy fixed it. Most people went outside to smoke or wandered to the break room. I needed to grab my water bottle from my locker, which was in a room adjacent to the cold storage area. The cold storage was exactly what it sounds like. Massive refrigerated rooms where they kept the processed fish before shipping. The temperature in there stayed just above freezing, and the walls were thick insulated metal. I'd been in there a few times for various reasons, but I never liked it. Something about the dead cold and the stacks of fish boxes always made me uneasy. I was walking past the entrance to one of the cold storage units when I heard something. A wet sound. Like fabric tearing, but heavier, wetter. I should have kept walking. I should have gotten my water bottle and gone back to the line. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and I was tired enough that my judgment was impaired. I opened the door to the cold storage unit. The cold hit me first, that immediate shocking cold that takes your breath away. The lights were on, which was unusual. Someone was in there. I could see them at the far end between the stacks of boxes. It was Esteban. He was facing away from me, and he was doing something. His arms were moving in this strange, jerking motion, and that wet tearing sound was louder now, echoing off the metal walls. "Esteban," I called out. My voice sounded small in that big cold space. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just kept moving, kept making those strange jerking motions. I stepped further into the cold storage, my breath coming out in clouds. I could see him more clearly now. His work apron was on the floor. His shirt was pulled up over his shoulders, and his skin... Jesus Christ, his skin was coming off. It wasn't bleeding. That's what made it so much worse. His skin was peeling away from his back in these long strips, like he was shedding. Like a snake. But underneath wasn't muscle and tissue. It was something else. Something that moved independently, writhing and shifting under the peeling skin. I could see ridges, segments, things that looked almost like insect parts, but wrong, all wrong. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because Esteban's head turned, not his body, just his head. It rotated further than a human head should be able to rotate, and I saw his face, or what I thought was his face, because it was coming off too. The skin around his jaw was loose, hanging, and underneath I could see something dark and glistening. His eyes reflected the fluorescent light like an animal's eyes, bright and unnatural. I ran. I didn't think, didn't process what I'd seen, just turned and ran out of that cold storage unit as fast as I could move. My boots slipped on the wet concrete floor of the processing area. I crashed through the door to the supervisor's office. He was sitting at his desk doing paperwork, and he looked up at me with annoyance. "What the hell, Reese?" "In the cold storage," I gasped out. I was shaking. My whole body was shaking. "Esteban, there's something wrong with him. He's not human. His skin is coming off and there's something underneath." The supervisor stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed, stood up, and grabbed his radio. "Show me." We went back to the cold storage unit together. The supervisor opened the door. The lights were still on. The cold rushed out at us. But Esteban wasn't there. The space between the boxes where I'd seen him was empty. No peeled skin on the floor. No sign anyone had been there at all. Just boxes of processed salmon and that bone-deep cold. "Reese, how many hours you been working straight?" the supervisor asked. "I know what I saw," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Go home. Get some sleep. Come back tomorrow night if you're feeling better." I went back to the bunkhouse where I was staying with a dozen other cannery workers. Tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Esteban's head turning, saw that thing underneath his skin. When I finally did drift off, I had nightmares about peeling off my own skin and finding something else underneath. The next night, I went back to work. I had to. I needed the money. and there weren't a lot of options in Dillingham if you walked off a cannery job. Esteban wasn't on the line. The supervisor said he'd quit, left town on the morning flight back to Anchorage, said he had a family emergency. I was relieved. I thought that was the end of it. But then my hands started feeling weird. It began about a week after the incident in the cold storage. Just a slight stiffness in my fingers, like I'd overworked them. But it got worse. My knuckles started to ache, and I could feel something moving under my skin, something that felt like extra joints forming. I went to the clinic in Dillingham. The doctor said it was probably arthritis from the repetitive motion of the work, gave me some anti-inflammatories, and told me to ice my hands. The medication didn't help. By the end of the season, my fingers could bend in ways they shouldn't. Not dramatically, not like Esteban's, but enough that I noticed. Enough that when I looked at my hands, I felt sick. I left Alaska as soon as the season ended, swore I'd never go back. But here's the thing. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. It's been years now, and the changes haven't stopped. They're slow, so slow that most people don't notice. But I do. I see the way my fingers have more flexibility than they should. I feel the extra joints developing, these small hinges under my skin that let my fingers bend backwards just slightly. And I smell it sometimes, that chemical smell that Esteban had, coming from my own skin. I've seen doctors, rheumatologists, orthopedic specialists. They all say there's nothing wrong with me. The x-rays look normal. The MRIs show regular bone structure. But I know what I feel. I know what's happening to me. And the worst part? I get these urges now. To go back to Alaska. To go back to the canneries. It's like a compulsion, a pull I can't fully explain. Every summer, when Bristol Bay fishing season starts, I feel it stronger. This need to return, to work the processing line again. I've resisted so far, but it gets harder every year. I don't know what Esteban was. I don't know if he was ever human, or if he was always something else wearing a human shape. And I don't know what's happening to me, what I'm becoming. But I know this. Whatever is under our skin, whatever we really are beneath this flesh we wear, it's not what we think it is. And in places like Dillingham, in the cold and the isolation and the endless work, sometimes the masks slip. Sometimes we see what's really there. I still work with my hands. I'm a mechanic now, in Oregon, far from Alaska, far from the ocean and the fish and the cold. But I look at my hands every day, and I see those extra joints getting more pronounced. I feel them bending in impossible ways. And I know it's only a matter of time before someone else notices, before the transformation becomes too obvious to hide. If you ever find yourself working at a cannery in Alaska, watch the people around you. Watch their hands. Watch how they move. Because sometimes the person standing next to you on the processing line isn't what they appear to be. And sometimes just being near them is enough to start the change. I'm living proof of that. My name is Edgar, and I'm a long-haul trucker. I've been driving the Dalton Highway for 11 years, hauling supplies up to the oil fields in Prudhoe Bay. If you don't know the Dalton, let me paint you a picture. It's 414 miles of mostly gravel road that cuts through some of the most remote wilderness in North America. There are maybe 3 places to stop for fuel, and cell service is non-existent for most of the route. In winter, it's one of the most dangerous roads in the world. I've driven it hundreds of times. I thought I knew every mile, every turn, every weird quirk of that highway. But what happened to me in February 2009 made me realize I don't know anything at all. It was the middle of winter, which up there means 24-hour darkness and temperatures that regularly hit 40 or 50 below zero. I was 34 at the time, hauling a load of drilling equipment from Fairbanks up to Deadhorse. It was supposed to be a routine run. I'd left Fairbanks around noon, which meant I was driving in complete darkness. The sun doesn't rise that far north in February. You exist in this perpetual twilight that messes with your sense of time. The weather started getting bad about an hour past Coldfoot, which is the last real checkpoint before you head into the Brooks Range. The wind picked up, and snow started blowing across the highway in these thick white sheets. Whiteout conditions. I've driven through plenty of them, so I wasn't too worried. I just slowed down, turned on my running lights, and kept the CB radio on in case any other truckers were coming the opposite direction. That's when I first heard it. The CB crackled to life, but it wasn't another driver. It was this mechanical voice, flat and emotionless, reading off numbers. Coordinates, I realized after a moment. Latitude and longitude. I figured it was some kind of emergency broadcast, maybe from one of the oil company facilities. But the coordinates were weird. They kept changing, and each time the voice read out a new set, they seemed closer to my current position. I tried switching channels, but every frequency had the same broadcast. That same mechanical voice, reading coordinates in this precise, inhuman cadence. The numbers were getting closer. I could tell because I knew roughly where I was on the highway, and the coordinates were converging on my location. It felt wrong. Everything about it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then I saw the semi-truck. It was pulled off to the side of the highway, engine running, lights on. The driver's door was hanging open. I slowed down, debating whether to stop and check. You don't just leave a truck running with the door open in these conditions. You'd freeze to death in minutes. But what really got me was the snow around the truck. It was fresh powder, completely undisturbed. No footprints. No sign that anyone had walked away from the vehicle. Just this truck sitting there, with its engine running and its door open, like the driver had simply vanished into thin air. I grabbed my radio. Breaker, breaker. This is Edgar heading northbound past mile marker 270. Got an abandoned semi here, engine running, door open, no sign of the driver. Anyone copy? Static. Then that mechanical voice again, but this time it was different. It said my name. Edgar, unit number 7439. That was my truck number. How did this broadcast know my truck number? The voice continued. 10, 9, 8. It was counting down. My heart started pounding. I hit the accelerator, my truck lurching forward on the icy road. The mechanical voice kept counting. 7, 6, 5. I didn't know what would happen when it reached 0, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that abandoned truck, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was happening. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Every single radio frequency exploded with screaming. Not human screaming. I don't know how to describe it. It was like taking every horrible sound you've ever heard, every expression of pain and terror and agony, and playing them all at once through a speaker that was never meant to handle that kind of input. The CB speakers distorted, crackling and popping. I reached for the radio to shut it off, but my hand froze, because I could see something in my rearview mirror. Lights. Another truck behind me, getting closer. But I knew that highway. I checked my mirrors constantly. There hadn't been anyone behind me for the last hour. Where had this truck come from? The screaming stopped. The radio went silent. Not static. Not the mechanical voice, just complete and total silence. The truck behind me was still there, matching my speed exactly. I tried to get a look at it, but the blowing snow and darkness made it impossible to see clearly. All I could make out were the headlights and the vague shape of a semi. I drove faster. The truck behind me sped up. I slowed down. It slowed down. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My mouth tasted like copper, that metallic tang you get when you're absolutely terrified. Then I passed another landmark I recognized, a distinctive rock formation that marked the halfway point through the Brooks Range, and I saw my own truck, parked on the side of the road, engine running, lights on, driver's door hanging open, fresh snow around it with no footprints. I was looking at my own truck from the outside while sitting in my truck. That's not possible. That can't happen. But I was seeing it. The truck behind me flashed its lights. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and for just a split second I saw the driver. It was me. I was driving the truck behind me, my own face staring back at me through the windshield, expression completely blank. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into Dead Horse. The sun was starting to rise, which meant it was around 10 or 11 in the morning. I'd left Coldfoot around 6 p.m. the previous day. The drive should have taken maybe 8 or 9 hours, but I'd lost time. 6 hours, just gone. I checked my logbook, checked my phone, checked everything. 6 hours missing with no explanation. I went straight to the way station office. The guy working there was someone I'd known for years, a fellow named Tyson, who'd been manning that station since before I started driving the Dalton. "Edgar, you look like hell," he said when I walked in. "Rough drive." "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did you see me drive through here earlier, maybe around 4 or 5 this morning?" Tyson frowned. "You just got here. This is the first I've seen you today." "You're sure? You didn't see my truck number come through?" "Positive. We log every truck. You just pulled in 20 minutes ago." I told him what happened. The coordinates on the CB, the abandoned truck, the countdown, the screaming, seeing my own truck on the side of the road losing 6 hours. Tyson listened without interrupting, his expression getting more serious as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're not the first person to report weird stuff on that stretch of highway," he finally said. "There's been others. Truckers seeing things that don't make sense. Time doing funny things. We don't talk about it much because, well, people think you're crazy if you do." "What do you think it is?" I asked. Tyson shrugged. "Magnetic anomalies, maybe. The aurora messes with electronics sometimes. Or maybe it's something else. Something we don't have an explanation for. All I know is that section of highway between Coldfoot and here, something's wrong with it. Especially in winter. Especially during the darkest part of the year." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think it was just magnetic fields or atmospheric conditions playing tricks on my equipment and my perception. But that didn't explain the dashboard camera. See, I had a camera mounted on my dash that recorded continuously while I was driving. It was my insurance, my proof in case anything happened. When I got back to my bunk that night, I reviewed the footage from the drive. The camera had recorded the entire trip, but the footage didn't match my memory. It showed me driving past my own truck 6 different times. 6 times. Each time from a slightly different angle, but always the same truck, same open door, same absence of footprints. And the timestamp on the video was impossible. According to the footage, I'd been driving in loops, covering the same stretch of highway over and over again for those missing 6 hours. There's more. The audio from the camera picked up the CB broadcast. I listened to it with headphones. Really listened. The mechanical voice reading coordinates. When I played it back slowly, I could hear something underneath the voice. Whispers. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. All speaking at once in this cacophony of sound that my conscious mind hadn't registered, but that was definitely there on the recording. They were saying things. Names. Truck numbers, dates going back decades. I reported it all to the state troopers, showed them the footage. They were interested at first, but then they did some checking. Pulled records of trucks that had gone missing on the Dalton over the years. Drivers who disappeared without explanation. They found 17 cases dating back to the 1970s when the highway was first built. 17 drivers who'd simply vanished. No bodies ever found. No trucks ever recovered. Just gone. The coordinates from my CB recording, the ones the mechanical voice was reading out, I looked them up on a map. They all pointed to the same location. About 30 miles east of the Dalton Highway, out in the middle of nowhere. Just empty tundra. I found satellite imagery of the area online, spent hours zooming in and scanning for anything unusual. And I found something. Vehicles, dozens of them, arranged in a perfect circle. Semi-trucks mostly, but some smaller vehicles too. All sitting in this geometric pattern in the middle of the tundra, where no roads lead. I never reported that finding to anyone. I don't know why. Something inside me said it was better not to know. Better not to ask questions about why those trucks were arranged that way, or what had arranged them. The troopers closed their investigation, chalked the whole thing up to driver fatigue and hallucinations caused by the extreme conditions. They sealed the case. Said I'd probably had a medical episode, maybe a small stroke or seizure that caused time loss and false memories. I still drive the Dalton. It's my job, it's what I do, but I won't drive it in February anymore. Won't drive it during the darkest part of winter. And I always check my CB before heading into that stretch between Coldfoot and Dead Horse. If I hear anything unusual, any kind of broadcast that sounds mechanical or wrong, I pull over and wait. I wait until it stops, no matter how long that takes. Because here's what I believe. I think that highway, or that specific stretch of it, exists in multiple places at once, multiple times at once. I think during certain conditions, during the deepest darkness and the worst weather, the boundaries get thin. You can slip through, end up driving the same road but in a different time, a different version of reality. And something is collecting the people who slip through, arranging their vehicles in that circle out on the tundra, like trophies or specimens or offerings to something we can't comprehend. I got lucky. I slipped through, but I slipped back. Those 6 hours I lost, I think I was somewhere else, driving in some other version of that highway. And whatever's out there, whatever's broadcasting those coordinates and counting down and screaming through the CB, it saw me. It knows me. Sometimes late at night, my CB will crackle to life even when it's turned off, and I'll hear that mechanical voice reading coordinates, always getting closer, always counting down. So here's my question for you. Have any of you experienced lost time while driving? Hours you can't account for? And if you have, what's the last thing you remember before the gap? My name is Johnny, and I'm a high school English teacher. 3 years ago, I moved to Kotzebue, Alaska, a small town of about 3,000 people on the Baldwin Peninsula in the Northwest Arctic. I'd spent my entire life in Phoenix, Arizona, teaching at the same school for 12 years, and I needed a change. When I saw the posting for a teaching position in rural Alaska, something clicked. I applied, got accepted, and by September 2019, I was standing in front of my new home, a small 2-bedroom house provided by the school district as part of my contract. The house was old, probably built sometime in the 70s, based on the architecture and the avocado green appliances in the kitchen. It sat on the edge of town, close enough to walk to the school, but far enough that I had some privacy. The front yard was just tundra, no trees, nothing green except the low shrubs and moss that covered everything. The neighbors were sparse. An elderly Inupiaq couple lived about 200 yards to my left, and to my right was just empty land stretching toward the sound. I moved in during early September, when the weather was still relatively mild. Temperatures in the 40s, which felt cold to me coming from Arizona but was apparently warm for Kotzebue. The house had basic furniture, heating that worked reasonably well, and a basement that I was told to avoid during breakup season because it tended to flood. The school administrator who showed me around mentioned the previous tenant had left suddenly, about 6 months prior, but didn't elaborate on why. I didn't think much of it. People leave Alaska all the time. The isolation gets to them. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Teaching kids in a community this small and remote was completely different from my experience in Phoenix. The students were quieter, more reserved, but also incredibly resilient. They dealt with things I'd never even considered. Subsistence hunting, family members lost to accidents or suicide, the brutal darkness that was coming. Because by late September, the days were getting noticeably shorter. By October, we were down to maybe 7 or 8 hours of daylight. By November, it would be much less. That's when I started noticing the house settling. At first, it was subtle. a slight tilt to the bathroom floor, the front door not quite closing properly, requiring an extra push. I mentioned it to another teacher at school, and she laughed. "Welcome to permafrost," she said. "The ground freezes and thaws. Houses shift. It's normal." But it didn't feel normal. The settling got worse. By mid-October, there was a visible slope to the living room floor. Marbles would roll from one end to the other. The cracks in the walls widened. I called the school district maintenance department, and they sent someone out to look. The guy walked around the foundation, checked the crawl space, and shook his head. "Permafrost is thawing under your house," he said. "Climate change. Happens more, and more these days. We'll need to get some engineers out here to assess it, but honestly, this house might need to be condemned." "How long before that happens?" I asked. He shrugged. "Could be weeks, could be months. Just keep an eye on it. If it gets bad, let us know, and we'll find you somewhere else to stay." I should have pushed harder, should have demanded they move me immediately, but housing was limited in Kotzebue, and I didn't want to be difficult in my first year. So I stayed. The basement started flooding in late October, even though it wasn't breakup season. Water seeped up through the concrete floor, pooling in the corners. I went down there with a flashlight to see how bad it was, and that's when I found the items. Old things, preserved in the cold water. A rotary telephone, magazines from the 70s, a child's toy, one of those pull-string talking dolls. The water was ice cold, and it had this smell. Not just mildew or standing water. Something organic. Something dead. I went to see my neighbors, the elderly Inupiaq couple. The woman's name was Nyla, and she'd lived in Kotzebue her entire life. When I knocked on their door and explained about the flooding and the old items, her expression changed. She invited me in, made me tea, and then told me something that made my blood run cold. "That house shouldn't be there," she said. "The land it's built on, it's not good land. My grandmother told me stories about that place. Long time ago, maybe 1920s or 1930s, there was a very bad winter. Famine. People were starving. Some families, they did things. Terrible things to survive." "What kind of things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Nyla was quiet for a long moment. "The kind of things you don't talk about. The kind of things that mark a place, leave it hungry." She wouldn't say more, but she told me I should leave that house, move somewhere else. I thanked her for the tea and went home, unsettled but not yet truly frightened. That would come later. The noises started in early November, scratching sounds coming from beneath the house. At first I thought it was animals, maybe foxes or something trying to get warm under the crawl space. But the scratching had a rhythm to it, an intentional quality. It would start around midnight and continue for hours. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like something digging. I couldn't sleep. The darkness was oppressive by then. We were down to maybe 4 hours of weak daylight, and the sun barely cleared the horizon. The rest was just twilight and night. The isolation started getting to me. I'd go days without talking to anyone outside of school. The scratching continued every night, and I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to something beneath me trying to get in. Then I started having the dreams. Vivid, horrible dreams about starving people. Emaciated figures with sunken eyes and protruding bones, digging in frozen ground with their bare hands. They were looking for something, searching desperately. And they were digging upward, toward me, toward the surface. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat despite the cold, and the scratching would still be going on beneath the floor. By mid-November, the house had tilted dramatically. The slope was severe enough that I had trouble walking from the bedroom to the bathroom without feeling dizzy. Water from the basement had started seeping up through the floorboards in the kitchen. Dark water that left stains and smelled like rot. And there were things in the water. Small things. When I looked closely with a flashlight, I could see them. Bones. Tiny bones floating in the dark water. Finger bones. Toe bones. Teeth. I called the school district again, more insistent this time. They said they'd send someone, but it was November, and everything moved slowly. Meanwhile, I was living in a house that was literally sinking into ground that was releasing things that should have stayed buried. The scratching got louder, more insistent, and I started seeing them in the dreams. Their faces, men, women, children, all starving, all desperate, all looking at me with accusation in their eyes. The autumn equinox hit on November 21st. I remember because that was the day everything went wrong. I woke up to find the house had tilted so severely that the front door was jammed shut. The windows wouldn't open. I was trapped. Water was coming up through the floor everywhere now, not just the kitchen. Dark, foul-smelling water that soaked into the carpet and made the whole house reek of decay. And the scratching wasn't coming from beneath anymore. It was coming from inside the walls, from under the floorboards directly beneath my feet. Whatever was down there had gotten into the house. I could hear it moving through the spaces between floors, through the walls, surrounding me. The bones were everywhere now, pushing up through the floorboards like plants growing in fast motion. Small bones at first, then larger ones. Ribs, vertebrae, skulls. They emerged from the dark water that was flooding the house, and I realized with horror that I was standing in the middle of a mass grave. I tried to break a window, grabbed a chair, and smashed it against the glass, but the house had tilted so much that I couldn't get proper leverage. The water was up to my ankles now, cold and thick. Things brushed against my legs in the water. I could feel them, skeletal fingers grasping at my jeans. I screamed. I don't remember much of the next 3 days, just fragments. The water rising, the bones emerging, faces in the dark water, pressed against the surface from below, trying to break through. And the terrible, overwhelming feeling of hunger. Not my hunger. Their hunger. The hunger of people who'd starved to death, whose bodies had been hidden, whose deaths had never been acknowledged. I was found on November 24th. The school had sent someone to check on me when I didn't show up for work for 3 days. They had to break down the door. I was in the corner of the living room, curled in a ball, hypothermic and dehydrated. The house was condemned immediately. When they excavated the foundation to demolish it, they found what Nyla had warned me about. The remains of 43 people buried in a mass grave directly beneath where the house had been built. Men, women, and children. The forensic team determined they'd died sometime in the late 1920s or early 1930s. Cause of death was starvation, but many of the remains showed evidence of something else. Cut marks on the bones, signs of butchering. The local elders weren't surprised. They said the site had been known to their grandparents' generation, a place where desperate people had done unthinkable things during a famine year. The bodies had been buried in secret, the location never officially recorded. When developers came in the 70s, they either didn't know or didn't care. They built houses on top of the grave. I wasn't the first person this had happened to. The previous tenant, the one who'd left suddenly 6 months before I arrived, had experienced something similar. So had the tenant before that. The house had a history of people moving in and leaving abruptly, often with stories of noises, flooding, and psychological distress. But no one had stayed long enough for the full horror to manifest. Not until me. I left Kotzebue 3 days after being rescued. The school district released me from my contract, citing medical reasons. I went back to Arizona, back to teaching in Phoenix, where the ground stays solid and the dead stay buried. But I still have nightmares. I still feel those skeletal fingers grabbing at my legs. And I know that those people, those starving, desperate people who died so horribly, are still there, still hungry, still reaching upward from their shallow grave, trying to pull someone down to join them. The house was demolished, the land marked as contaminated. But permafrost keeps thawing. Climate change keeps accelerating. And there are other houses in Kotzebue built on permafrost that's starting to melt. Other places where the ground might be releasing secrets that were meant to stay frozen forever. I wonder sometimes how many more graves are under how many more houses, waiting for the ice to thaw and the past to emerge. Have you ever lived in a place that felt wrong from the moment you moved in? A place where you felt like you weren't alone even when you were? Tell me in the comments what happened. My name is Kylian, and I've been a bush pilot in Alaska for 16 years now. I started flying when I was 21, got my commercial license at 23, and by the time I was 25, I was running mail and passenger routes all over western Alaska. If you're not familiar with bush flying, it's basically the lifeline for villages that aren't connected to the road system. We fly everything: mail, groceries, medical supplies, passengers, even the occasional casket. It's dangerous work, especially in winter, but I loved it. Past tense. Because what happened to me on August 14th, 2003 changed everything. I was 29 years old that summer, based out of Bethel, flying a Cessna 207 that had seen better days but was still airworthy. The route that day was simple: Bethel to Mountain Village, with a mail delivery and 2 passengers. Mountain Village is a small Yupik community on the Yukon River, about 50 air miles northwest of Bethel. The flight usually took around 45 minutes in good weather, and that day the weather was perfect. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, light winds, the kind of day that makes flying feel like the best job in the world. I took off from Bethel around 2 in the afternoon. My passengers were locals, heading home after shopping in town, and they dozed off almost immediately after we reached cruising altitude. I was flying at about 3,000 feet, following the river like I'd done hundreds of times before. The landscape below was the usual tundra and water, flat and endless, punctuated by the occasional village or fish camp. The engine was running smooth. All my instruments showed normal readings, and I was on schedule to land in Mountain Village by 2:45. Then the sky changed. I've flown in Alaska for most of my adult life, and I've seen some weird atmospheric phenomena. Northern lights, sundogs, ice crystals creating halos around the sun. But I'd never seen anything like this. The sky started taking on this color that I can't adequately describe. Purple-green, but not like the aurora. More solid, more present. And then I saw stars. In the middle of the afternoon, bright, clear stars visible against this purple-green sky with the sun still shining. My first thought was that something was wrong with my eyes. Maybe a migraine aura or something. But my passengers saw it too. One of them, an older woman, started speaking rapidly in Yupik. And even though I didn't understand the language, I could hear the fear in her voice. The other passenger, a younger guy, just stared out the window with his mouth open. Then my instruments went haywire. The compass started spinning. The altimeter jumped from 3,000 feet to 7,000, then down to 500, then back up. The fuel gauge dropped to empty, then full, then half. None of the readings made sense. I switched to manual flying, relying on visual references, but that's when I realized something was very wrong with the world below me. I recognized the landscape. I'd flown this route so many times I could do it blindfolded. But the geography was wrong. There was a mountain range where there shouldn't be one. The river was flowing in the opposite direction. And there was a village in a location where no village existed. I checked my map, checked my heading, tried to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like flying over a version of Alaska that was similar but fundamentally different. I tried the radio. Bethel Tower, this is Cessna November, 734 Tango. Charlie, do you copy? Static. I tried again. Bethel Tower, November 734 Tango. Charlie requesting assistance. More static, then something came through. My own voice. Bethel Tower, this is Cessna November, 734 Tango. Charlie, do you copy? It was me, speaking the exact words I'd just said, but delayed by maybe 5 seconds. Bethel Tower, what's happening? I said into the radio. My voice came back again, repeating my question after that same 5-second delay. Then another voice broke through, also mine, but saying something I hadn't said yet. Requesting emergency landing, Fuel critical, losing altitude. That wasn't true. My fuel was fine as far as I could tell, and I wasn't losing altitude. But I heard myself saying it on the radio. The older woman was praying now, a continuous stream of Yupik that might have been traditional prayers or just desperate pleas. The younger passenger had gone pale and quiet. I didn't blame them. I was terrified. I'd been trained for mechanical failures, weather emergencies, all the standard crisis scenarios. But nothing in my training covered this. Nothing covered the sky being the wrong color, or instruments showing impossible readings, or hearing yourself on the radio saying things you haven't said. I decided to descend, thinking maybe getting closer to the ground would help me orient myself. As I dropped altitude, I could see that impossible village more clearly. And I wish I hadn't. The structures there weren't buildings. Not really. They were geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Angles that didn't make sense. Buildings that seemed to exist in more dimensions than I could perceive. Looking at them made my eyes water and my head throb. And there were figures. People maybe, but moving in ways that people don't move. Their movements were jerky, discontinuous, like watching a film with frames missing. They'd be in one position, then suddenly in another position 10 feet away without any transition. And they were looking up at me. I could feel it. Dozens of those figures, all staring up at my plane. The radio crackled again. This time it was the Bethel Tower, or what sounded like the tower. November to 734 Tango. Charlie, you've been missing for 18 days. Where are you? 18 days. That was impossible. I'd taken off less than an hour ago. Negative Bethel Tower. I departed at 1400 hours today. Current time. Should be approximately 1445. The response was immediate. November 734 Tango. Charlie, today's date is September 1st. You departed August 14th, 18 days ago. We've had search and rescue looking for you. My hands were shaking on the controls. September 1st. That couldn't be right. But the voice on the radio sounded genuine. Sounded like the actual tower operator I knew. Bethel Tower, I don't understand. I've been in the air less than an hour. There was a long pause. Then, November 734 Tango. Charlie, can you describe your current location? I looked down again at that impossible village with its geometric structures and discontinuous figures. I can't. I don't know where I am. Nothing looks right. My passengers were clutching their seats. The woman had stopped praying and was just staring ahead with wide, terrified eyes. The younger guy was crying silently. I had to get us out of this. Had to find a way back to normal reality, if that's what this was. A break from normal reality. I pointed the nose up, gave the engine full throttle, climbed as fast as the old Cessna would go. The purple-green sky seemed to press down on us. The stars were so bright they cast shadows inside the cockpit. And I could feel something watching us. Not the figures in the village below. Something bigger. Something vast and incomprehensibly ancient that existed in the spaces between moments, between places. I closed my eyes. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe prayer, maybe just the desperate hope that when I opened them again, things would be normal. I counted to 10. Opened my eyes. The sky was blue. Normal blue. The stars were gone. The sun was in the correct position. I checked the instruments. They were all reading normally. Compass steady. Altimeter showing 3,500 feet. Fuel at 3/4. I looked down, and the landscape made sense again. The river was flowing the right direction. The mountains were where they should be. The impossible village was gone. Bethel Tower, November the 734 Tango. Charlie, do you copy? I said into the radio, my voice hoarse. November the 734 Tango. Charlie, this is Bethel Tower, we copy. What's your status? It was the normal tower operator, sounding completely routine. I'm okay. Requesting vectors to Mountain Village. The operator gave me the standard heading and asked if I needed assistance. I told him no, everything was fine. What else could I say? I landed in Mountain Village 30 minutes later. When I shut down the engine and checked my watch, 12 hours had passed. 12 hours. I'd taken off at 2 p.m. and it was now 2 a.m. the next day. But I had no memory of those 12 hours. No memory of where I'd been or what had happened beyond those minutes of impossible sky and wrong geography. My passengers stumbled off the plane without a word. They wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me. They just grabbed their bags and disappeared into the darkness. I spent the night in Mountain Village, sleeping in the plane because I was too shaken to fly back immediately. The next morning, I did the return flight to Bethel. When I landed, the airport manager pulled me aside. "Killian, where the hell were you? We had you listed as missing. Search and rescue was about to launch." I told him I'd had instrument problems, had to land and wait it out. He didn't believe me, I could tell, but he didn't push it. He just told me to file a report and get the plane inspected. The plane was fine. The mechanic couldn't find anything wrong with any of the instruments. And when I checked the fuel, the tank was completely empty, bone dry. That Cessna held about 80 gallons. I should have had at least 20 gallons left based on the flight time. But it was empty. I'd burned through an entire tank of fuel in what should have been a 45-minute flight. I never flew that route again. I requested different assignments, stuck to routes further south and east. Other pilots took over the Bethel to Mountain Village run, and as far as I know, none of them experienced what I did. But I heard rumors. Stories from other bush pilots about weird things happening in that area. Time distortions. Strange atmospheric phenomena. Passengers and pilots seeing things that shouldn't exist. Most people dismissed it as stress or exhaustion, or the psychological effects of flying in such an isolated environment. But I know what I saw. I know those 12 hours are missing from my life. And I know that somewhere out there, in the spaces between the normal world and whatever lies beyond it, there's a version of Alaska that exists in dimensions we're not meant to perceive. A place where the rules don't apply and things that should be impossible are terrifyingly real. I still fly. I still love being in the air, but I'm more careful now about where I fly and when. And I always trust my instruments until they start telling me impossible things. Because that's when you know you've crossed over into somewhere you don't want to be. Somewhere you might not come back from. I got lucky. Those 12 missing hours could have been forever. Could have been me and my passengers joining whatever exists in that purple-green sky with its visible stars and impossible village. We made it back. But I don't know why we were let go. And I don't know if that door is still open, waiting for the next pilot who flies through at just the wrong moment. Have any of you experienced missing time, hours, or days you can't account for? Drop your story in the comments if you're brave enough to remember. My name is Uriel, and I'm an emergency room nurse. I've worked in healthcare for almost a decade now, starting as a certified nursing assistant right out of high school and working my way up through nursing school while doing night shifts at various hospitals. In 2014, I took a position at the Norton Sound Regional Hospital in Nome, Alaska. Nome is a city of about 3,800 people on the Seward Peninsula, right on the edge of the Bering Sea. It's isolated, it's harsh, and the winters are brutal. But the pay was good, the work was meaningful, and I needed a fresh start after a bad breakup back in Seattle. The hospital in Nome serves not just the city but dozens of surrounding villages. We get medevac flights bringing in patients from all over the region, and the ER can go from dead quiet to absolute chaos in minutes. I'd been working there for about 6 months when Christmas Eve 2014 rolled around. I'd volunteered to work the overnight shift, partly because I had no family in Alaska and nowhere else to be, and partly because holiday pay was double time. The shift started at 7 p.m. on December 24th and would run until 7 a.m. on Christmas morning. The evening started normally. A few minor cases, a kid with a fever, an elderly man with chest pain that turned out to be indigestion, a woman who'd cut her hand while preparing food. Standard stuff. By 10 p.m., things had quieted down. The waiting room was empty. Most of Nome was home with their families, celebrating. The hospital felt hollow, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. I was at the nurse's station doing paperwork when the first patient arrived. He came in through the ambulance bay, brought by the volunteer EMTs. A man in his 40s, Nome local, severe frostbite on his hands and feet. But it wasn't just frostbite. His fingers were mangled, torn, like something had chewed on them. The EMTs said they'd found him stumbling down Front Street, hypothermic and delirious. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Santa's helpers came early. Santa's helpers came early. We got him into a trauma bay, started warming protocols, assessed the damage. The attending physician, who was in his 60s and had seen everything working in rural Alaska, looked at the injuries with a frown. "These are bite marks," he said. "Human bite marks, looks like. Multiple attackers." The patient was conscious but not coherent. He just kept mumbling about helpers and Christmas and something about teeth. We sedated him, started treatment, and I went back to the nurse's station to document everything. 20 minutes later, another patient arrived. A woman in her 30s, similar injuries. Frostbite, lacerations, bite marks. She was more lucid than the first patient, and what she told me made my skin crawl. She said she'd been putting up Christmas lights outside her house when they came. Small figures, she said, wearing elf costumes. She thought at first it was kids playing a prank. But they weren't kids. They moved wrong, she said. Their proportions were off, and their eyes were black, completely black. No white, no iris, just solid black that reflected light like an animal's eyes. "They asked me for Christmas spirits," she said, her voice shaking. "They kept saying they needed Christmas spirits, and when I tried to go inside, they attacked me." She'd managed to fight them off and run to a neighbor's house, but not before sustaining significant injuries. We admitted her, got her stabilized, and I reported what she'd said to the attending. He looked troubled but didn't comment. What could he say? It sounded insane. By midnight, we'd received 7 more patients, all with similar injuries, all with similar stories. Attacks by figures in Christmas costumes. Elves mostly, but one patient described something in a Santa suit. Adults in ill-fitting outfits, faces that looked wrong, black eyes, asking for Christmas spirits in children's voices. One patient, a teenager, had actual chunks of flesh missing from his arm. Something had been eating him. The hospital administrator called the Nome Police Department. They sent 2 officers to investigate, but within an hour, one of those officers was brought into the ER with injuries. He'd encountered them near the elementary school. There were dozens, he told us. Dozens of them, just standing in the parking lot, wearing these costumes. When we approached, they scattered, but not like humans. They moved on all 4s, fast like animals. His partner had fired his weapon, he said, hit at least 3 of them, but they just kept moving. The hospital went into lockdown. All exterior doors were secured except the ambulance bay, and we posted security there. The power went out around 1:30 a.m. The backup generators kicked in immediately, but we were running on emergency lighting only. The hallways took on this dim, eerie quality, long shadows, flickering lights, and then we heard them. Bells, jingle bells. The sound echoed through the hospital corridors, getting closer. I was checking on a patient when I heard them. Small footsteps in the hallway outside, multiple sets moving in coordination, and voices. High-pitched voices singing Christmas carols, but wrong. The melody was right, but the voices were off-key, discordant, unsettling. I locked the patient room door and peered through the small window. What I saw still gives me nightmares. They were in the hallway, 5 of them. Adults wearing elf costumes that were too small, the fabric straining over their bodies. Their faces were visible in the emergency lighting, and they looked human at first glance. But something was wrong with the proportions. Eyes too far apart, mouths too wide. And those eyes, those solid black eyes that caught the light and shone like marbles. They were looking in the rooms, peering through windows, trying door handles. One of them turned and looked directly at me. It smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. It spoke in a child's voice, high and sweet. "We need Christmas spirits. Will you share your Christmas spirits?" Then it giggled, and the sound was so incongruous with what I was seeing that my mind almost broke trying to process it. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. The patient I was with, an elderly Inupiaq woman who'd come in with pneumonia, grabbed my hand. "They're the hungry ones," she whispered. "My grandmother told me stories. When I was young, the elders would leave offerings in winter. Food, sometimes alcohol, things to satisfy them, keep them from the village. But people stopped doing it, stopped believing, and now they're back." The things in the hallway moved on. I could hear them throughout the hospital, their bells jingling, their voices calling out for Christmas spirits. There were screams, patients crying out, staff calling for help. I stayed in that room with the elderly woman, both of us silent, listening to the chaos outside. At some point, I realized the patient rooms on our floor were empty. All the patients who'd been admitted that night, the ones with bite marks and injuries, they were gone. Their rooms were open, beds empty, trails of blood leading into the hallways. I don't know how long I stayed in that room. Time became meaningless. The bells would get closer, then fade. The voices would call out, sometimes in English, sometimes in Inupiaq, asking for spirits, asking for Christmas, asking to come in. The elderly woman prayed in her language, a continuous stream of words I didn't understand but found comforting nonetheless. Dawn came slowly. The darkest part of winter in Nome, the sun barely rises. But there was light, weak and gray, seeping through the windows. And with the light, the sound stopped. The bells went silent. The voices ceased. The hospital fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the hum of the generators and distant sobbing. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The scene was carnage. Blood on the walls and floors, equipment overturned, and bodies, 9 of them. The patients who'd been admitted that night, found in various locations throughout the hospital. They'd been partially consumed, bite marks covering their bodies. One of the nurses was dead too, found in a supply closet, her face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The police came with the sunrise. State troopers from larger communities brought in by plane. They documented everything, took statements, collected evidence. But what could they conclude? The official report called it a mass psychotic episode, a shared delusion brought on by isolation, darkness, and the stress of the holiday season. They said the patients had injuries from fights with each other, that the staff had panicked and locked themselves in rooms, that the deaths were tragic but explainable. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I'm not alone. Every staff member who was in that hospital on Christmas Eve 2014 knows the truth. We don't talk about it publicly because who would believe us? But privately, among ourselves, we share what we learned afterward, the research we did into Nome's history, the old traditions that had been abandoned. The Inupiaq practice of leaving offerings in winter, a practice called feeding the winter, that stopped in the 1960s when missionaries convinced people it was superstitious nonsense. The elders in the surrounding villages weren't surprised when we asked them about it. They said the hungry ones come during the darkest part of winter, looking for what's owed to them. They take the form of things people expect to see during celebrations, things that should bring joy but become vehicles for hunger. Elves, Santa, reindeer, snowmen. They feed on the spirits of Christmas. But when there aren't enough spirits, when people don't leave offerings, they feed on something else. They feed on flesh. Nome reinstated some of the old practices after that Christmas. Not officially, not in any public way, but around the winter solstice, you'll see offerings left outside homes. Food, alcohol, tobacco, small gifts placed in the snow for things that might come looking. The hospital has a new protocol too. On Christmas Eve, we leave the lights on in every room. We play music continuously. We make noise, create warmth, generate as much cheer and spirit as possible, because the hungry ones are still out there, waiting in the darkness, wearing their costumes, ringing their bells. And if we don't feed them the spirits they're looking for, they'll take what they need in other ways. I still work in Nome. I still work holiday shifts. But Christmas Eve is different now. It's not about the money or having nowhere else to be. It's about keeping watch, making sure the lights stay on, making sure the spirits stay strong. Because I've seen what happens when the darkness gets too deep and the offerings stop. I've seen what wears the costume of joy and hides teeth underneath. So tell me, have you ever seen something during the holidays that wore the wrong face? Something that looked like it belonged but moved like it didn't? Share your experiences below, because I think there are more of these things out there than we want to admit. My name is Royce, and for the past 19 years, I've worked on oil rigs in Alaska. I started as a roustabout when I was 22, worked my way up to roughneck, then derrick hand, and by 2021 I was a driller making good money on offshore platforms in the Beaufort Sea. If you don't know anything about offshore drilling, it's hard work in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Beaufort Sea is frozen most of the year, dark for months during winter, and the isolation is total. You're out there on a platform with maybe 40 or 50 other workers, surrounded by ice and ocean, completely cut off from the rest of the world, except for satellite communications and the occasional helicopter bringing supplies or crew changes. I'd worked dozens of different rigs over the years, but in March 2021, I got assigned to a platform about 60 miles offshore from Prudhoe Bay. It was a newer rig, only been operational for about 3 years, and we were drilling exploratory wells, looking for new reserves. The crew was experienced, the equipment was top-notch, and the operation was running smoothly. I was on a 3-week rotation, 3 weeks on the rig, 3 weeks off back in Anchorage. I was 8 days into my rotation when everything went wrong. We were drilling deep that day, pushing past 8,000 feet. The geologists were excited because the core samples were showing promising signs of oil-bearing formations. I was in the drill shack monitoring the equipment when we hit something unexpected. Not rock, not the usual sedimentary layers we'd been punching through. Something else. The drill bit broke through into what seemed like a pocket, a void space that shouldn't have existed at that depth and pressure. The driller called for a pause while we assessed what we'd hit. We pulled up the drill string to check the bit, and that's when we saw it. The bit was covered in this black substance that looked like oil at first glance, but it wasn't oil. It was thicker, more viscous, and it had this fibrous quality to it, like tissue, like organic material. Our tool pusher, a guy named Coda, who'd been in the industry for 30 years, looked at it and immediately ordered us to contain it. We put the contaminated bit in a sealed drum and set it in one of the storage areas, standard procedure for unknown substances. But the stuff didn't stay contained. Within an hour, we noticed it had seeped through the drum. Not leaked, seeped. Like it was dissolving the metal or passing through it somehow. It was spreading across the floor of the storage area, moving slowly but deliberately, like it was seeking something. Coda made the call to the company headquarters, explained what we'd found. They told us to collect samples, document everything, and keep drilling. The priority was always production, always the oil. So we cleaned up the storage area as best we could, took samples of the black substance for analysis, and went back to work. But the stuff kept coming up with the drilling mud. Every time we pulled up the string, more of it appeared. And it started growing. That's the only word I can use, growing. The samples we'd put in containers began expanding, developing these filament-like structures that pressed against the glass. Under a microscope, which our geologist had on site, the substance looked almost biological. Cells, or something like cells, moving and dividing. But nothing like any biological material anyone had seen before. It responded to warmth, growing faster when near heat sources. And it responded to us. When someone got close to a container, the substance would press against the side nearest to them, as if it was aware of their presence. The crew started getting sick around day 3 after we'd first hit that pocket. Respiratory issues at first, coughing, difficulty breathing. The medic on site thought it was just the usual rig crud, people passing around a cold in close quarters. But it got worse fast. People were coughing up black phlegm, not blood, not mucus, but this dark terry substance that looked like what we drilled into. Some of the guys developed fevers. Others complained of nightmares, vivid dreams about being underground, about drowning in darkness. I started noticing changes in my coworkers around day 5. Subtle things at first. Eyes that looked darker, pupils dilated even in bright light, skin that felt cold to the touch, speech patterns that seemed slightly off, like they were having to think about forming words. Koda was one of the first. He'd been working directly with the samples, documenting everything for the company. His eyes went completely black over the course of a single shift. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, black from edge to edge. When I pointed it out to him, he looked at me with those black eyes and smiled. "It's fine, Royce. Everything's fine. We're just becoming ready." That's exactly what he said. Becoming ready. Ready for what? I didn't ask because something in his tone made it clear. I didn't want to know the answer. By day 6, half the crew had black eyes. The substance had spread beyond the storage areas. It was in the pipes now, growing through the rig's water system. When you turned on a faucet, black filaments would come out with the water. The walls in some sections felt warm and soft, like they were no longer metal, but something organic. I could feel vibrations through the deck plates, rhythmic pulses that felt like a heartbeat. The rig was changing, being transformed by whatever we'd drilled into. I tried to call for evacuation, used the satellite phone to contact shore services, told them we had a medical emergency and needed immediate helicopter transport for the entire crew. The response was bureaucratic nonsense. Weather conditions, flight schedules, approval processes. They'd get someone out to us in 3 days, they said. 3 days. I knew we didn't have 3 days. The nightmares got worse. I'd dream of being deep underground, surrounded by this black organic substance that was alive and hungry and ancient. It had been down there for millions of years, trapped in rock, waiting, and we'd let it out, given it access to the surface, to warmth, to food, because that's what we were to it. Food. Fuel for its growth. In the dreams, I could feel it inside me, spreading through my bloodstream, replacing my cells with its own, making me part of itself. I stopped sleeping after that. Just stayed awake through my shifts and my off time, drinking coffee and trying to ignore the changes happening around me. The crew members with black eyes had stopped eating in the galley. They'd gather in groups in the lower levels of the rig, in the areas closest to the drill shaft, and just stand there. Dozens of them, perfectly still, facing the same direction toward the hole we'd drilled. When I asked one of them what they were doing, he said they were listening. Listening to what? To the source, he replied. It's calling us home. By day 7, I was one of maybe 5 crew members who hadn't been infected or transformed, or whatever you want to call it. We barricaded ourselves in the helicopter pad area, the highest and most isolated part of the rig. We could see the rest of the platform from there, and what we saw was impossible. The metal structures were changing, warping. Organic material was growing over everything, dark and pulsing. The drill, Derek, had become this massive pillar of black tissue that rose into the sky like a monument to something ancient and terrible. The transformed crew members were moving supplies down into the lower levels. Food, equipment, anything they could carry. They were building something down there, or feeding something. We could hear sounds from below, not mechanical sounds, not human sounds. Something alive and vast breathing through the rig's structure. On day 8, we saw the helicopter approaching. Coast Guard, responding to our emergency calls. We were waving frantically, trying to signal them. The helicopter got within a quarter mile of the rig, then suddenly veered off. The pilot came over the radio, his voice confused and frightened. "I'm not seeing a rig. I don't know what I'm seeing. Some kind of organic structure, like a coral formation or something. That can't be your position." He circled twice more, each time reporting the same thing. The rig looked wrong to him. Looked like something that shouldn't exist in the middle of the ocean. They wouldn't land. Called back to base. Reported the situation as a navigational error or equipment malfunction. Said the coordinates we'd given them led to an anomalous formation of unknown origin. They couldn't see us as human beings on a platform. They saw something else. Whatever the rig had become, it was masking its true nature somehow, appearing different to outside observers. That night, I made a decision. One of the lifeboats was still accessible, mounted on the side of the helicopter deck. The 4 other uninfected crew members had given up, just sitting and waiting to be taken by whatever was happening. But I couldn't do that. I'd rather die in the freezing ocean than become part of that thing. I lowered the lifeboat in darkness, the automatic system still functioning despite everything. Climbed down, fired up the motor, and headed away from the rig as fast as that small boat would move. Behind me, the platform rose against the night sky, but it didn't look like a rig anymore. It looked like something alive, a massive organism made of metal and flesh and darkness, pulsing with bioluminescent light from within. I could see figures on the decks, dozens of them, all standing motionless, watching me leave. The Coast Guard picked me up 18 hours later, hypothermic and delirious. They took me to the hospital in Barrow, treated me for exposure and dehydration. When I tried to tell them what happened, they said I'd been through trauma. The official report stated that I'd experienced a gas leak on the platform. The toxic fumes had caused hallucinations, that I'd panicked and abandoned ship. The rig was sealed by the company, declared a total loss due to structural contamination. No investigation, no attempt to retrieve the other crew members, just a quiet shutdown and abandonment. But I know the truth. I know that rig is still out there, 60 miles offshore from Prudhoe Bay. Still growing, still changing, still connected to whatever we drilled into at 8,000 feet. The company put warning buoys around it, declared it a navigational hazard. Ships and aircraft are instructed to avoid the area, and they do, because everyone who gets close reports the same thing I did. It doesn't look like a rig anymore. It looks like something that grew from the ocean floor, something ancient and wrong. I left the oil industry after that. Couldn't go back. Couldn't risk drilling into something else that shouldn't be disturbed. Because here's what keeps me awake. How many of these things are down there? How many pockets of ancient organic material, alive and waiting, trapped in rock formations around the world? And what happens when we drill into all of them? When we give them all access to the surface? I still have nightmares. Still wake up tasting that black substance in my throat. And sometimes, late at night, I can feel it inside me. A small piece that got in before I escaped. Growing slowly. So slowly I can almost convince myself it's not real. But my eyes are getting darker. Not black yet, but darker. And I find myself thinking about the ocean, about what's under the water, about going back. Have you ever felt like something was growing inside you? Something you couldn't see or explain but knew was there. Tell me I'm not alone in this. My name is Kyson, and I'm a wildlife researcher specializing in marine mammals. I got my PhD in biology from UC Santa Barbara in 1995 and spent the next few years bouncing around different research positions before landing a grant to study sea otter populations in Prince William Sound, Alaska. This was 1998, almost a decade after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and there was still significant interest in understanding how the ecosystem was recovering. I was 31 years old, eager to make my mark in the field, and completely unprepared for what I was about to experience. The research position came with a small cabin about 15 miles outside of Cordova, accessible only by boat or floatplane. Cordova is a fishing town of maybe 2,500 people on the eastern edge of Prince William Sound, surrounded by mountains and glaciers and some of the most pristine wilderness left in North America. My cabin was even more isolated, sitting on a rocky beach with no neighbors for miles in any direction. It was perfect for my work. I needed quiet to record animal vocalizations, and I needed solitude to focus on data analysis. What I got was something else entirely. I moved into the cabin in early October 1998, just as the days were getting shorter and the weather was turning. The cabin was basic but functional. One main room with a wood stove, a loft for sleeping, a small bathroom with a composting toilet, and a generator for electricity. I had solar panels that worked when there was sun, which wasn't often that time of year. Most of my equipment ran on batteries, recording devices, computers, analysis software. I'd spend my days out on the water in my inflatable boat, recording otter vocalizations and behavior, then come back to the cabin to process the data. The work was going well. I was getting good recordings, documenting interesting social behaviors, building a solid data set for my research. But about 3 weeks after I'd moved in, I started noticing something strange in my recordings. I'd be reviewing audio I'd captured during the day, listening through headphones to isolate specific vocalizations, and I'd hear whispers. Human whispers underneath the animal sounds. At first, I thought it was interference, maybe picking up radio transmissions or something from passing boats. But the whispers were too clear, too deliberate. I isolated the audio, filtered out the animal sounds, and enhanced the whispers. What I heard made my hands shake. It was my voice, my exact voice, whispering things I didn't remember saying, describing my activities from the previous day in perfect detail. Recorded 3 females with pups at the kelp bed north of the cabin. Water temperature 42 degrees. Wind from the southeast at 10 knots. These were facts, accurate observations, but I had no memory of speaking them aloud. I checked my equipment, thinking maybe I'd accidentally left a recorder running while I was making field notes. But the timestamps didn't match. The whispers were on recordings made while I was out on the water, but they were describing things I'd done the day before. It was like someone had been following me, documenting everything I did, using my voice to do it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was talking to myself without realizing it, some subconscious habit I'd developed from spending so much time alone. Maybe the isolation was getting to me faster than I'd anticipated. I'd read about researchers in remote locations developing strange behaviors, auditory hallucinations, even mild psychosis from the solitude. I decided to be more mindful, to pay attention to whether I was speaking aloud while working. But the whispers continued. Every recording I made contained them, and they started describing things I hadn't done yet. Future events, spoken in my voice, with certainty and detail. We'll repair the boat motor tomorrow. We'll find a loose connection in the fuel line. We'll cut my left hand on the housing. The next day, I did repair the boat motor. I did find a loose connection in the fuel line, and I did cut my left hand on the housing, exactly as the whisper had described. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. I'd lie in the loft of the cabin, listening to the wind and the waves, wondering if I was losing my mind. The rational part of my brain said yes, this was clearly a psychological break. The isolation, the darkness, the stress of the research. But another part of me, a deeper part, knew something else was happening. Something I couldn't explain with psychology or science. I set up continuous recording equipment in the cabin, multiple devices running 24 hours a day, capturing everything. If I was speaking without knowing it, this would prove it. I went about my routine, conscious of every word I spoke, every sound I made. I reviewed the recordings each night, listening through hours of audio. And there it was, my voice, clear as day, speaking while I was silent, discussing things I was thinking about but not saying, planning my next day's research, describing my concerns about the whispers themselves. "Kyson is worried," my voice said on the recording, while I sat silently at my desk. "Kyson thinks he's going insane. Kyson wonders if he should leave the cabin, return to Cordova, seek medical help." The use of third person was chilling. It wasn't me speaking about myself. It was something else speaking about me, using my voice to do it. I packed a bag that night, planning to leave first thing in the morning. I'd call the research foundation, explain I was having medical issues, get someone to cover the project. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember why I'd packed. The bag was there, sitting by the door, but the urgency was gone. I unpacked, made breakfast, went about my day as if nothing had happened. That's when I realized whatever was happening had progressed beyond just recordings. It was affecting my memory, my decision-making. There were gaps in my recollection of the previous weeks, entire days I couldn't account for, and when I checked my field notes, they contained observations I didn't remember making, written in my handwriting but describing things I had no memory of witnessing. I tried to leave again a few days later, got in the boat, started the motor, headed toward Cordova, but halfway there, I turned around and came back to the cabin. I didn't decide to turn around. My hands just turned the wheel, my body just brought me back, and sitting at the dock, I found myself speaking aloud, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. Kyson will stay. Kyson will continue the work. Kyson will become ready. That word, again. Ready. Ready for what? I made it to Cordova on my next supply run, spoke to a doctor there, described my symptoms, auditory hallucinations, memory gaps, possible dissociative episodes. The doctor was kind, professional, ran some basic neurological tests, asked about stress and sleep and diet. Everything came back normal. He suggested I might be experiencing a form of isolation syndrome, recommended I take a break from the remote research, spend some time around other people, get proper rest and nutrition. I tried. I really did. I stayed in Cordova for a week, sleeping in a hotel, eating regular meals, socializing with the locals. The whispers stopped. The memory gaps decreased. I started feeling like myself again. But there was this pull, this constant nagging feeling that I needed to go back to the cabin, that I had unfinished business there, that something was waiting for me. I returned in early November. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it, cold and dark and empty. I fired up the generator, got the wood stove going, settled back into my routine, and the whispers returned immediately. Not just in recordings now, I could hear them in the cabin, in the woods outside, in my own thoughts. My voice everywhere, speaking about me, planning for me, deciding for me. I stopped fighting it. What was the point? Whatever was happening was beyond my control, beyond my understanding. I continued the research, continued making recordings, continued documenting the otter populations. My published papers from that period are well regarded in the field. The data was solid. The analysis was thorough. No one reading them would suspect anything was wrong. But I know the truth. I know I wasn't the one doing the work during those final months in the cabin. Something else was working through me, using my knowledge and my skills for its own purposes. The whispers weren't just documenting my actions. They were directing them, guiding me to specific locations, specific animals, specific observations, building a data set for reasons I still don't understand. I left Alaska in March 1999. The grant period ended, and I didn't renew it. Took a teaching position at a small college in Oregon, got as far from Prince William Sound as I could while staying on the West Coast. But the whispers never completely stopped. Even now, 25 years later, I'll be working in my office or lying in bed at night, and I'll hear it. My voice whispering just at the edge of audibility, describing what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, what I will do next. I've seen specialists, neurologists, psychiatrists, audiologists. They find nothing wrong. The prevailing theory is that I experienced some form of psychotic break during my time in isolation, and I've developed a persistent auditory hallucination as a result. They've given me medications over the years, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers. I take them sometimes, when the whispers get too loud or too insistent, but they never completely go away. Here's what I believe, for what it's worth. I think that cabin, or that location, or something in Prince William Sound is a thin place. A place where the boundary between individual consciousness and something larger is permeable, where your thoughts become audible, where your voice can be borrowed by something that exists in those gaps between moments of awareness. I think I got too close to it, spent too much time in that liminal space, and it marked me somehow, made me part of its recording, its documentation of reality. I still do research, still work with marine mammals, though I avoid Alaska now, and I've learned to live with the whispers, to accept them as part of my existence. Sometimes I even find them comforting, in a strange way, like having company, even if that company is just another version of myself, speaking from somewhere outside my conscious control. But I'll never forget what it felt like in that cabin, in the darkness and the isolation, listening to my own voice plan my future, knowing that I wasn't alone in my mind, that something was in there with me, watching through my eyes, speaking through my mouth, living through my life. The cabin is still there, as far as I know, still sitting on that rocky beach 15 miles from Cordova. Other researchers have probably used it over the years. I wonder if they heard the whispers too. I wonder if they're still hearing them. So here's my question for you. Have you ever heard your own voice when you knew you weren't speaking? Have you ever felt like someone else was thinking your thoughts? Because if you have, you might want to pay attention to what that voice is saying. It might be trying to tell you something you need to know, or it might be trying to make you into something you never agreed to become. My name is Eden, and I need to tell you about the worst night of my life. This happened in November 2012, and I was 27 years old at the time, driving from Tok to Glen Allen on the Tok Cutoff Highway in Alaska. I was heading to a winter job at a ski resort near Valdez, making the long drive from my apartment in Fairbanks, where I'd been living since graduating college. The Tok Cutoff is about 125 miles of mostly empty highway cutting through the Alaska Range, and in November, it's one of the lonelier stretches of road you'll ever drive. I left Tok around 4 in the afternoon, which meant I'd be driving in darkness most of the way. November in interior Alaska means maybe 6 hours of weak daylight, and by 5 p.m. it's pitch black. I was driving a beat-up Ford pickup truck that had been reliable enough, or so I thought. I had survival gear in the back, sleeping bag, extra clothes, some food, a shovel, standard stuff for Alaska winter driving. But I didn't have a satellite phone, and cell service along that highway is non-existent. I had a CB radio that barely worked, and that was it. The temperature had been dropping all day. When I left Tok, it was around 20 below zero. By the time I was an hour into the drive, my truck's temperature gauge was showing 35 below. This was the first major freeze-up of the season, that period in late fall when everything suddenly locks into winter mode. The kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze when you breathe, that makes exposed skin hurt within seconds. I was about 30 miles from Glen Allen when the truck started making noises. A grinding sound from the engine, then a loss of power. I nursed it along for maybe another mile before it just quit. Coasted to a stop on the shoulder, tried to restart it. Nothing. The engine was completely dead. I sat there for a moment, assessing my situation. 30 miles from the nearest town, no cell service, temperature at 40 below and dropping, and full darkness. I tried the CB radio, calling out on the emergency channel. Static. I tried different frequencies, same thing. The radio had always been spotty, but now it seemed completely dead. I knew I couldn't stay in the truck. Without the engine running, the cab would cool down to ambient temperature within an hour, and I'd freeze. My only option was to walk toward Glenallen and hope someone came along and picked me up. I bundled up in everything I had: thermal underwear, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, my parka, a hat, gloves, a face mask. Grabbed my backpack with my sleeping bag and some granola bars. Started walking. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty and dark, my headlamp creating a small circle of light that seemed pathetically inadequate against the vast darkness surrounding me. I'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes when I saw the building, a roadhouse sitting back from the highway about 100 yards. I could see the outline of it against the stars, a rectangular structure that looked abandoned but intact. I'd driven this highway before and didn't remember seeing any structures in this area, but I was grateful for it. Any shelter was better than being exposed on the road. The roadhouse was old, probably from the 70s or 80s based on the architecture. 2 stories, wood construction, with a covered porch across the front. The windows were dark, and snow had drifted against the foundation. It was clearly abandoned, but the door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, my flashlight sweeping across the interior. The inside was surprisingly intact. There was a main room with a bar along one wall, tables and chairs scattered around, a stone fireplace at the far end. Dust covered everything, and the temperature inside was barely warmer than outside, but it was shelter. Protection from the wind. I could see stairs leading to a second floor, and doorways that probably led to a kitchen and storage areas. I found wood stacked near the fireplace, dry and ready to burn. Someone had left it there, maybe other travelers who'd sheltered here before. I got a fire going, the flames catching quickly and beginning to push back the cold. The warmth was immediate and glorious. I set up my sleeping bag near the fireplace, ate a granola bar, and started to relax slightly. I'd wait until morning, then continue walking. In daylight, I'd have a better chance of flagging down a passing vehicle. That's when I heard the voice outside. "Eden, Eden, are you in there?" It was a man's voice, calm and professional. "This is Alaska State Trooper Musa. Your truck was reported abandoned. Are you in the roadhouse? I'm here to help you." Relief flooded through me. Someone had found my truck, somehow tracked me here, sent help. I stood up, ready to go to the door, but something made me hesitate. How did the trooper know my name? My registration would show my name, sure, but how did he know I was in this building specifically? And why was he alone? Standard procedure would be to send at least 2 troopers for a rescue in these conditions. "Eden, it's very cold out here. Please open the door." The voice was perfectly polite, perfectly professional, but something about it felt wrong. The cadence was too even, too measured, like someone reading from a script. I went to one of the windows and carefully looked out. There was a figure standing in the snow about 20 feet from the building. In the moonlight, and the glow from my fire coming through the windows, I could see he was wearing what looked like a trooper's uniform. But he was just standing there, perfectly still, arms at his sides, not moving, not stamping his feet or trying to stay warm. At 40 below, you move. You have to. Your body generates heat through movement, but this person was statue still. "I know you can see me, Eden. Please come out. I have a warm vehicle. I can take you to safety." That voice, so flat, so perfect. No breath clouds visible in the extreme cold. No condensation. Like the words were coming from a speaker rather than a human mouth. I backed away from the window. Every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong, that whoever or whatever was outside was not a state trooper and was not there to help me. I went to the bar, looking for something I could use as a weapon. Found an old baseball bat behind the counter, gripped it tightly. The figure outside started moving. Not walking exactly. It was gliding across the snow, circling the building, always maintaining that same distance of about 20 feet. And it was trying different voices now. "Eden, it's Mom. Please come out, honey. You must be so cold." That was my mother's voice, exact in every detail. But my mother was in Arizona and hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. "Eden, This is Charlie from the ski resort. We were expecting you hours ago. Come on out. Let's get you where you need to go." Charlie was real, the manager at the resort where I was supposed to start work. But Charlie wouldn't be out here, wouldn't know where I was. The thing circled the building for hours. Every time it passed a window, it would stop and speak in a different voice. People I knew, people I'd known, voices pulled from my memory with perfect accuracy. My father, who died when I was 12. My best friend from college. My first boyfriend. All of them speaking my name. All of them offering to help. Offering to let me rest. Offering warmth and safety and comfort. But I didn't open the door. I kept the fire burning, kept the bat in my hand, and waited. Because something about this felt ancient. Felt like a trap that had been set and reset for decades. I started looking around the roadhouse more carefully. Found dates carved into the wooden walls, initials, names. Robert, 1973, waited 3 days. Susan, 1988, it knew my sister's voice. Mike and Tara, 1995, don't go outside no matter what. These were warnings, left by people who'd sheltered here before, who'd encountered the same thing I was encountering. And there were other marks, too. Dark stains on the floor near the door, scratches on the inside of the doorframe, like someone had been trying to claw their way back in. This roadhouse was a trap. The thing outside used it as bait, waited for stranded travelers to take shelter, then tried to lure them out. Around 3 in the morning, the voices stopped. The figure outside had vanished. I could see nothing through the windows except snow and darkness. But I didn't trust it. Didn't trust the silence. I stayed inside, keeping the fire burning, waiting for dawn. The sun rose around 9 a.m., weak and pale. I waited another hour, watching through the windows, seeing nothing. Finally, carefully, I opened the door. The snow outside was undisturbed except for my own tracks leading to the building. No footprints from any trooper or person, just smooth wind-blown snow. I started walking again, following the highway toward Glenallen. Around 11 a.m. I heard an engine. A snowplow was coming up the road, the driver slowing when he saw me. He pulled over, a heavy-set guy in his 50s named Hamza, who worked for the state highway department. "You okay?" he asked, looking concerned. "What are you doing out here?" I told him about my truck breaking down, about walking and finding the roadhouse. I didn't mention the figure or the voices. He nodded, understanding. "You sheltered in the old roadhouse? Smart. That place has saved a few lives over the years." He paused, then added, "Though some people say strange things happen there, especially during freeze-up." "What kind of strange things?" I asked, though I already knew. Hamza shrugged. "People hear voices, see things. Some folks claim something lives out here, something that hunts during the coldest nights, uses the roadhouse as bait. I don't know if I believe it, but I know 3 people froze to death near that roadhouse back in the 70s, found outside just a few yards from the door, like they'd left shelter and couldn't get back in." He drove me to Glenallen. I called a tow truck for my vehicle, filed a report, got a hotel room. Spent the next day just trying to process what had happened. The rational part of my brain wanted to explain it away. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. Extreme cold can create auditory illusions. Maybe I'd been more affected than I realized. Maybe the whole thing was a stress-induced delusion. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I'd seen. And when I think about those other people, the ones who froze just outside the roadhouse door, I understand what happened to them. They'd been inside, safe and warm, and something had called to them in voices they trusted, voices they loved. And they'd opened the door. They'd stepped outside, and whatever was out there had made sure they never made it back in. I never drove the toll cutoff in winter again. Found different routes, different jobs, different ways to get where I needed to go, because I know that thing is still out there, still waiting near that roadhouse, still using voices stolen from memories to lure people out of safety and into the killing cold. And here's what keeps me awake. How did it know those voices? How did it know my mother's voice, my father's voice, people I'd known years ago, It pulled them from my mind somehow, accessed my memories, and used them against me, which means it's not just a predator. It's something that can read thoughts, harvest memories, use your own mind as a weapon against you. Have you ever heard someone call your name when you knew they couldn't be there? Have you ever felt compelled to go outside in dangerous conditions because a voice you trusted told you to? Tell me what happened, because I think there are more of these things than just the one on the talk cutoff. I think they're waiting in cold places all over Alaska, all over the world maybe, using our memories against us. My name is Jalen, and I work as a city planner for Juneau, Alaska's capital city. I'm 33 years old, and I've been in urban planning for about 8 years now, the last 3 of them here in Juneau. For those who don't know, Juneau is unique among American state capitals because it's not accessible by road. You can only get here by boat or plane. It's a city of about 32,000 people, squeezed between mountains and the ocean in southeast Alaska, built on the steep slopes of Mount Juneau and Mount Roberts. The city has a fascinating history as a gold rush town, and that history is literally under our feet in the form of old mine tunnels and infrastructure that most people have forgotten about. In June 2017, I was assigned to review old infrastructure maps as part of a modernization project. The city was planning to upgrade some of the downtown water and sewer systems, and my job was to cross-reference current infrastructure with historical records to make sure we weren't going to accidentally drill into something we shouldn't. It was tedious work, going through dusty archives in the City Hall basement, comparing hand-drawn maps from the 1800s and early 1900s with modern CAD drawings. That's when I found the discrepancies. The historical maps showed an extensive tunnel system beneath downtown Juneau, far more extensive than what appeared in our current records. We knew about some of the old mine tunnels, the tourist ones that had been converted into attractions. But these maps showed dozens of additional passages, storage areas, and what looked like living quarters, all connected in a network that spread beneath several city blocks. Most of these tunnels had been sealed in the 1920s, according to notations on the maps, but there were no records explaining why. I brought this to my supervisor's attention, and after some discussion, we decided it was worth investigating. If there were unknown voids beneath the downtown area, we needed to know about them for structural and safety reasons. The city engineer, a woman named Aliyah, who'd been working in Juneau for 15 years, agreed to accompany me on a survey of whatever we could access. We got permission from the city council and started our investigation on a Tuesday morning. The access point was through a basement of an old building on South Franklin Street that had been built in the early 1900s. The building's owner had told us there was a sealed door in the basement that supposedly led to the old tunnel system. We brought proper equipment: flashlights, hard hats, rope, a first aid kit, communication radios, and mapping tools. The sealed door was exactly where the owner said it would be, behind some storage shelves in the deepest part of the basement. It had been bricked up, but the mortar was old and crumbling. Aliyah and I carefully removed enough bricks to create an opening we could squeeze through. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp stone and something else, something organic and old. Beyond the door was a tunnel carved into solid rock, about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. The walls showed tool marks from hand drilling, the way miners worked in the early 20th century. We activated our headlamps and started documenting everything, taking photos and measurements. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, heading roughly north under what would be the downtown commercial district. About 50 yards in, we found the first chamber. It was larger than I expected, maybe 20 feet across, with several passages branching off in different directions, and there were signs of habitation: old wooden crates, the remains of furniture, a rusted cook stove. But what caught my attention were the drawings on the walls, children's drawings done in what looked like crayon or colored chalk. Simple stick figures, houses, animals, normal kid stuff, except the dates written next to some of them were recent. 2015, 2016, some from just a few months ago. That's impossible, Aaliyah said, examining the drawings. No one should be down here. These tunnels have been sealed for almost a century. We moved deeper, following the main passage. The tunnel system was even more extensive than the maps had indicated. We found multiple chambers, storage areas, even what looked like a small chapel carved into the rock. And in one of the larger chambers, we found a homeless camp. Recent, clearly occupied. Sleeping bags, food containers, propane heaters, personal belongings. But no people. We were photographing the camp when we heard voices. Not from the direction we'd come, but from deeper in the tunnel system. Multiple people talking, the sound echoing off the stone walls in a way that made it hard to determine distance or direction. Aaliyah called out, identifying ourselves as city officials, asking if anyone was there. The voices stopped immediately. We waited, listening. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming toward us from one of the side passages. A figure emerged into our flashlight beams. A man, middle-aged, dressed in layers of dirty clothing. He looked at us with exhaustion and resignation. "You shouldn't be down here," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been breathing dust for too long. Especially not during the day. "We're from the city," I explained. "We're doing a structural survey. Are you living down here? We can help you find proper housing." He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Housing won't help. They don't come to the surface anymore. Only down here. They've always been down here." "Who?" Aaliyah asked. "Who's down here?" The man looked past us into the darkness of the tunnel behind us. "The 1920s people. That's what we call them. They come at night, dressed in old clothes, carrying lanterns. They offer you things. Shelter, food, work. But if you go with them, you don't come back. Not the same anyway." I exchanged a glance with Aaliyah. The man was clearly disturbed, possibly mentally ill. But there was something in his eyes that looked like genuine fear rather than delusion. "How many people are living down here?" I asked. "Maybe 15, 20. We move around, try to stay ahead of them. But it's getting harder. They're getting more active, taking people more often." He stepped closer, and I could see his hands were shaking. "You need to leave. Now, before dark." "It's 10 in the morning," Aaliyah said gently. "We're just doing a survey. We'll be out long before dark." "Dark doesn't mean what you think it means down here," the man said. "It's not about the sun. It's about when they wake up." Before we could respond, we heard something else. Music. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. Old music. The kind that comes from a phonograph with that distinctive tinny quality. And it was getting closer. The man's eyes went wide. "They're awake. You need to run. Now." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of a side passage with surprising speed. Aaliyah and I looked at each other. The music was definitely getting louder, and with it came the sound of footsteps. Multiple sets moving in coordination. And voices singing along with the music, old songs from the 1920s. "We should go," Aaliyah said, and I agreed. We turned back toward the entrance, moving quickly but trying not to panic. The music followed us, always maintaining the same distance, never getting closer but never fading either. And then we saw them, figures in the tunnel ahead of us, blocking our path back to the entrance. They were wearing old-fashioned clothing, suits, and dresses from the 1920s. Some were carrying oil lanterns that cast flickering shadows on the tunnel walls. They weren't threatening. They were just standing there, watching us. And they were smiling. One of them, an older man in a miner's outfit, stepped forward. "Welcome," he said. His voice had a strange quality, like he was speaking from very far away, even though he was right in front of us. "We've been waiting for workers. The mine needs workers. Come with us. We'll give you work, give you shelter, give you purpose." "We're leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Step aside, please." The figures didn't move. More of them emerged from side passages surrounding us. They all had the same smile, the same distant look in their eyes, and their skin looked wrong in the lantern light. Too pale, too waxy, like old photographs come to life. Aaliyah grabbed my arm. There, she pointed to a narrow passage to our right. We can go around them. We ran. The figures didn't chase us, not exactly. They just appeared ahead of us, emerging from passages we hadn't even noticed. The tunnel system was like a maze, and they knew it perfectly while we were lost. The music kept playing, that old phonograph music, and I realized it wasn't coming from any device. The figures were singing it, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. I don't know how long we ran through those tunnels. Time became meaningless in the darkness and the echoing confusion, but eventually we found ourselves in a chamber we hadn't seen before. It was set up like a mine office from 100 years ago. Desks, filing cabinets, time cards on the wall, and sitting at one of the desks was Aaliyah. Not the Aaliyah running beside me, but another Aaliyah, wearing a miner's coveralls, her face covered in coal dust, filling out paperwork with an old fountain pen. The Aaliyah next to me stopped dead. What is this? That's not me. That can't be me. The figure at the desk looked up and smiled. You'll start on the day shift, she said in Aaliyah's voice. Report to the foreman at 6 a.m. It's 1924. The mine is productive. We need good workers. I grabbed the real Aaliyah and pulled her toward another passage, the only one that didn't have figures blocking it. We ran blind, no longer trying to navigate, just trying to get away. And suddenly we were stumbling up a slope, seeing natural light ahead. We burst out of a tunnel entrance I didn't recognize, somewhere on the hillside above downtown Juneau. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. When I checked my watch, it said 2 p.m. We'd been underground for 4 hours, though it had felt like much longer. We made our way back down to the city, went straight to the police station, and reported what we'd found. The homeless camp, the figures, all of it. The police investigated. They found the homeless camp and the evidence of people living in the tunnels. But they found no figures in old clothing, no music, no office from 1924. They sealed the entrance we'd used and several other access points they discovered. But Aaliyah never recovered from what we'd experienced. She started having memories that weren't hers, memories of working in the mine in 1924, of spending months underground, of the foreman giving orders and the whistles signaling shift changes. 3 months after our experience, she stopped coming to work. When I checked on her, I found her apartment empty. Her car was there, her belongings were there, but she was gone. The police investigated, but they found no leads, no evidence of foul play, no signs of where she'd gone. 6 months later, I was reviewing old mine employment records as part of my research into what we'd experienced, and I found something that made my blood run cold. There was an employee record from 1924 for a woman named Aaliyah who worked as a mine engineer. The handwriting on the time cards matched Aaliyah's handwriting exactly, and there were newspaper articles from December 1924 about 43 mine workers who vanished without a trace. Just gone one day, never found, never explained. I left Juneau a year later. Couldn't stay in a city where the past isn't really past, where time can slip and fold and take you places you never agreed to go. But I still have nightmares about those tunnels, about the figures in their 1920s clothing, smiling and offering work, offering shelter, offering a place in a time that should be over but somehow continues beneath the streets. The tunnels are sealed now, filled with concrete. Official records say it's for structural safety, but I know the truth. They sealed them because what's down there doesn't follow our rules about time and reality. It exists in 1924 and 2017 simultaneously, and it's always looking for workers, always calling people down into the darkness, where years are just another direction you can travel. Have you ever felt like you belonged to a different time, like you were meant to be somewhere in the past but got stuck in the present? Because maybe you weren't stuck. Maybe you just haven't found the right entrance yet. And if you do, Will you recognize it for what it is before it's too late? That was the final story from Alaska's darkest corners. 9 true accounts of horror from the last frontier, where isolation breeds nightmares, and the line between reality and impossibility grows thin. These stories remind us that, in Alaska's remote towns and frozen wilderness, there are things that defy explanation, things that wait in the darkness and the cold for the unwary and the unlucky. Thank you for watching Bleak Fears. If these stories disturbed you, hit that subscribe button and join me as we explore more true horror from the world's most isolated places. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, some places are remote for a reason.